Tell us your name, your age, where you're from.
Okay, well, my name is Vincent Llewellyn Chappelle II, and I am 25 and from Chicago, Illinois. It's the act of making a group of people who are of a certain skin tone, usually darker skinned people, feel less than because of the simple fact that they are of darker skin tone. And it's something that many Black people have experienced through the Afro diaspora, whether in Central and South America, the Caribbean, or here in North American territory. And it is something that, I believe goes untalked about. And there aren't a lot of conversations happening, but it's nice that they are starting to happen. And it's something that we really need to heal from. And yeah, it's just something that really, it needs a lot of work, I would say. I've definitely experienced colorism, particularly growing up in a family of people who were either, very light-skinned, ethnically or racially ambiguous people, red hair, sandy brown, blonde hair, blue-eyed, green-eyed people, particularly on my dad's side. And as a person who wasn't as light as everybody else, I would say that I have experienced colorism, but I would definitely say that people in the family who were darker than I am, or are darker than I am, have experienced it on higher levels. Definitely. I mean, hearing things like, as long as you stay Black and ugly, or, just these value judgments on their aesthetic, because they're dark skinned, on top of the fact that some of their features might be more broad, or they don't look as ambiguous as other people in the family do. But for me, growing up in my family, I would say it was difficult, because you heard things like that, or you go swimming in the summertime and you come out and you go home with a tan, and I would hear my dad say things like, well, oh, you got Black, and it's the fact that Black was used as this, used in this really negative way to signify that something was wrong or bad. It was an issue. And for example, when I was about 12 years old, maybe 11, some of my nieces who are my age, and we were raised together, my mom was asking them at the kitchen table, what would you rather be with? Would you rather date or marry a dark-skinned boy or a light-skinned boy? And my mom is a light-skinned woman, and one of the nieces who is the same complexion as my mom, and granted, these are sisters, so that goes to show you how Black genetics can work. But one sister, who was the oldest, was like medium tone. The middle sister, my niece Valerie, was very light skinned like my mom and my sister. And the youngest daughter was dark skinned like their dad. And the younger niece, she stated that she wanted to marry a dark-skinned guy. And my mom just looked at her like, "Ooh, you want to marry a dark-skinned boy?" And it's just, something in me was it was struck. So at at that age, of course, I get it a lot more now, but I told my mom, well, it shouldn't be about, whether the person is dark-skinned or not. It should be about whether or not you love that person. It shouldn't matter. And I have been going through some issues accepting, my skin tone, particularly in the summertime when I would get a tan. And my mom told me that I was just mad because I wasn't really light-skinned and I didn't have pretty eyes. And at that moment, I was pretty much forever changed until I turned about maybe 21 years old. And I started to, I guess, see the beauty in my skin and my hair. And, my eyes didn't have to be, hazel or green or gray, in order for me to be noticed and to be seen, for, for who I am, or any type of physically attractive aesthetic I might have, or just the beauty that is my blackness. And even today when I talk about it, there are times where I might still hear somebody say, "Oh well, you're going to bat, or you're saying things about, us saying things about darker skinned people or people who are browner skinned, but you're not that dark." But it's really not the point. The point is that, there's privilege in being of a lighter skin tone. I mean, even though I'm not an extremely light skinned person, I would definitely say that I have a level of privilege because some of my features I know are a little bit more ambiguous than some of the relatives, particularly my grandmother, who's a dark-skinned woman. And that particular part of the family is from Louisiana, and they're dark-skinned Creole people, which is another thing that we never talk about. I've come to understand there is privilege in being of a lighter skin tone, particularly when you are racially or ethnically ambiguous in some aspect, or something on you looks a little bit different. Particularly when people say things like, "Oh, well, you look exotic," which is a really, really faulty term to use. And that's something that I had to grasp because I didn't see that I had any privilege because I might look slightly different or be slightly lighter than other people in the family. And I thought it was just something that applied to people who are far lighter than I am, or people who, might look, of a different racial background in the family. So I kind of understood that it kind of did apply to me too. So yeah, that would definitely be a part of my experience with colorism. I'm so sorry. Growing up on the south side of Chicago, going to living in a predominantly black neighborhood, these are dynamics that, all too well familiar with. And even in the school system that I grew up in, going to inner city schools, for example, a lot of my nephews and cousins who identify as male were all lighter skinned, or they had a certain aesthetic that made them ambiguous, and people were attracted to that and would say that they looked exotic. And, people just seemed to fawn over them, while, any darker skinned relatives that we had, particularly women and girls in the family, they did not get that same amount of attention. And it sometimes seems like they felt compelled to go above and beyond to get a boy's attention, while the boys in the family, and the men in the family as well, because my brothers are far older than I am, but particularly those who were lighter skinned and they had hazel eyes like our mom, they knew I guess the power that had, being of a lighter skin tone or looking a certain way. And they would sometimes abuse that power and also use that abusive power to abuse the people, particularly the women that they were with, because they felt like, they were better and they could just get anybody. And it was just that, I guess it was like some kind of like, it was this undeserved confidence. Honestly, I don't know how else to put that. And I could be wrong by putting it in that term, in those terms, I mean. But then of course there were the lighter skinned girls and women in the family like my mom. And as a matter of fact, I have a little niece who sometimes visits my sister, who's in her 40s, so she's a grandma now. And I'm, of course, in my 20s, my parents had me later. Just a small little backstory. And her parents, particularly my niece, one of the ones that I spoke about briefly before, is lighter skinned and she looks just like her mother completely. And they're teaching her, to say people are, black and ugly, or calling people ugly or bald headed. And that's another thing that goes along with colorism too, is hair texture and hair length. And if your hair is short, and it could even be by choice, particularly if you're darker skinned and you're a woman or a femme, you could be seen as somebody who might be a lesbian because you have shorter hair and because you're dark skinned, or people feel like you look more masculine. While even sometimes, on the other hand, if a lighter skinned woman does it, nobody really bats an eye, not too much. But particularly growing up in CPS, I definitely noticed the colorism dynamic. As a matter of fact, sophomore year in high school, for the yearbook committee, they were doing interviews, and a few girls were walking around and they were asking people, whether they like dark-skinned guys or girls, or light-skinned guys or girls. And there was a multitude of questions, but that was one of the questions, and it stood out to me, and that's the only one that I remember, and this was like 10 years ago, and it's the only one that I can remember. I mean, I was like, I even remember what I was wearing, where I was in the school. I was on the 3rd floor near the art room, and this is where they called us and asked us these questions. And the answers that I heard around me were absurd. Like, absolutely absurd. I don't like dark-skinned guys or girls because, they're angry, or they're violent, or they're not soft enough, or, things like that. And that was pretty much an unforgettable moment, particularly for me, since I was still going through trying to accept myself, not only my sexuality, but also, my blackness, or, my hair texture, or things like that. So yeah, something I've experienced. I would also like to add that elementary school was something similar to that too, but it wasn't so much, a gender thing, but they would I remember we would do this thing where they would ask you to hold out your arm like this, and if they could see your veins, that meant that you were lighter skinned. And that was like, now that I look back on it, and it was something that I did partake in, but of course I didn't know any better back then. But if I knew then what I know now, it would have definitely been different. But of course, as the saying goes, hindsight is 20/20. It's definitely 20/20. And it is really sad, when I think about it, that these were even things that were put into my head that because I was a little lighter skinned than somebody else, I was better. Or, because my hair had like a little bit of a curl to it, or like a looser curl to it, but it was thick, it somehow made me better. But it was just, I felt like those were definitely things that were instilled in me by my parents, who were baby boomers, and they had that same mentality instilled into them. Particularly my dad, who was extremely colorist, did not like dark-skinned women, and he had a loose curl pattern. His hair was wavy, and he actually made me cut mine off before he died when I was 14 years old, because he said my hair was too nappy and too kinky. So these, those are just things that you don't forget those things. Especially when I think about the fact that he wouldn't have married my mom if she was a dark-skinned woman, and that's really sad to think about. And there are a lot of people, I believe, on his side of the family, though they don't talk about it, who think like that still. Particularly with the black bourgeoisie background that they have. And of course, I would definitely say that it comes from, honestly, a lot of this, it stems from, our wonderfully pleasant world of slavery. That's sarcasm. Please, sarcasm. But it definitely stems from our history with enslavement, and black men, particularly dark-skinned black men, were seen as, being extremely masculine, or being extremely tough, and being able to, lift this and lift that, and do all of this back-breaking work. Even, black women too, to be quite honest. Even in some film depictions I've seen, you might see like a dark-skinned woman who was either enslaved, or, a depiction of a woman who was growing up during Reconstruction, or, the early 1900s, and she was from a sharecropping family, and they say, she can pick 400 pounds a day, and it's just, it gives this really, really sad perception of dark-skinned people. But definitely when it comes to men, I would definitely say that's one thing. But when it comes to lighter-skinned men, I would say that they're, because sometimes I don't know where I fit on that spectrum. I'm not even gonna lie. I do know that I wouldn't exactly be classified as dark-skinned, but sometimes I don't know where I fit, because sometimes people, they'll say I'm light-skinned, sometimes people will say I'm brown-skinned. Some people who are really light-skinned will just call me dark, so I don't know, but I definitely know I'm somewhere. But I can only speak from, what I've seen or experienced. But lighter-skinned men are usually seen as being softer or more sensitive. Aside from just being seen as aesthetically pleasing all around, but as far as attitudes go, usually softer or more sensitive or docile, or things of that nature. So
it seems like then that regardless of gender, light skin is seen as softer.
Oh yes, definitely
more sensitive.
Definitely more sensitive, yeah.
And that across genders, dark skin is seen as more tough, more rugged, more stronger, and more masculine.
Absolutely. I would definitely say that my experiences with that have, within the LGBTQ plus community, as far as black portion of that goes, my experiences have been a little bit different too, because if I'm, if I was dating someone, they might not have wanted to date me because I guess certain features that I might have make me look a little bit on, I guess, I guess like a little bit more effeminate to them, or certain gestures that I might use, or my attitude overall might be a turn off to them, on top of the fact that I, to them, look softer in the face, and that's not something that they might be going for. So they might want somebody who's dark skinned, particularly somebody who's dark skinned who wears, a snapback or looser clothing, or their features might be more broad, or they might have a more chiseled jawline or something like that. That might be the person that they go for in comparison to me. Now, granted, I have a problem with that. People, are sometimes attracted to whom they're attracted to, but particularly, I guess, for, speaking in light of dark-skinned people deserve to feel attractive. And if that is who somebody is going for, then who am I to say, oh, well, blah, blah, blah. I mean, but from my experiences, it's definitely, because I might have a certain look to certain people, I don't really know what that look is, but they might see me as not being masculine enough, which is not really a problem for me, because I'm kind of past that point of trying to prove that. I mean, I'm definitely not, about to try and go buy a bunch of snapbacks and Timberlands and stuff like that, try and, be something I'm not, or, what you might call in the LGBTQ community as trade. I can give y'all a lesson on that another time. But it's just basically it's almost like a false form of masculinity in order to attract someone instead of being able to be yourself. And that's definitely something that I've noticed. Or, if you're lighter skinned, they might expect for you to play a certain role, even sexually, to be quite honest. We're all grown here. Because you're lighter skinned, they perceive you to be softer or more feminine or something along those lines. So there's definitely colorism in colorism in every facet of Black life, honestly. Like, even whether you're, a cisgender person, a cisgender heterosexual person, cisgender, queer person, or, a trans person, a non-binary person. If you are Black, particularly if you are dark skinned, you are going to experience some kind of colorism somewhere, And then, of course, there's fetishism too, because especially from people who are either non-Black POC or white people, for example, who fetishize Black bodies, particularly darker skinned Black bodies, because they figure that you're more, sexually promiscuous, even though I don't really, think that promiscuity is a thing. I mean, people sleep with who they want to sleep with, particularly if they're consenting adults involved. But, they tend to see us as people who are, easier to get to, or, sex crazed maniacs who will do this, that, and third for them or to them. And it's all, just a really, really big fetish, pretty much. So, I mean, even when I see, queer couples who are interracial, granted, everybody has the right to recognize fine in any color they choose. But there's definitely a level of fetishism, I think, that goes into different dynamics of interracial relationships, or even in honestly, even in relationships that involve black people, there can be fetishism as well, because darker skinned people can definitely be fetishized by their lighter skinned partners. And that is honestly something that I've, just happened to be told about, and it wasn't something I was just like, oh, well, no, that's not true, but it did kind of blow my mind because I never thought about it in that light. But it's definitely a possibility. So, I mean, it's almost like an off-brand of what white people do to us pretty much on a daily basis all the time. So, yeah.
Something you said, I've never posed this question to anybody in an interview before, but something you said about if you're dark skinned, you will probably experience colorism in some way, some fashion. And this kind of reminds me to the guy that was with us last week who was like, I didn't experience racism.
Oh, yeah.
So what would you say, how would you respond to a dark skinned person who insists that they have never experienced colorism?
Honestly, one thing I would say is that if it is true, you are very lucky because that does not happen often. But honestly, I honestly think that it might be something that they just never really paid attention to. Particularly, I mean, if they might come from like even a certain social class, they just never really had to. They never really paid attention to it because, I mean, they had all like the best opportunities anyway. And that's not to deplete the experiences of dark-skinned people who might have been raised middle or upper class. But that could definitely be a reason why some dark-skinned people say they haven't experienced it. Maybe because they, were privileged enough not to. But for the bulk of dark-skinned people, I would definitely say most, if not all, dark-skinned people have experienced colorism. Whether it's something that they've noticed right off bat or something they've noticed later on and it's like a light bulb struck or something like that. But definitely, I would definitely say that that is probably a crock. And that just might not be something that they paid attention to, but I just don't know if you can be a dark-skinned person in this world today, particularly a dark-skinned black person, growing up in the black community and not experience some sort of racism or colorism, like, ever. I mean, even if you've ever, gone to a job and there were no, dark-skinned people there were probably light-skinned people, or, there's just like a slew of white people working in said establishment. You might not have gotten that job because you are dark-skinned. You might have more credentials than the people who are already there. And I mean, that's definitely, I would definitely say that most, if not all, dark-skinned people have or probably will at some point experience a level of colorism, even in their own families. So, I do have hope that it can change. I'm not exactly sure when, but I definitely think that conversations pertaining to it need to be had, because I don't think that they happen enough. And a lot of times, this is not to say that, for example, the lighter skinned people don't experience a level of colorism. I mean, I've heard some stories, but I definitely would not say that lighter skinned people experience it on the levels that darker skinned people do. And a lot of times when darker skinned people try to talk about their experiences with colorism, or, try to talk about their experiences with colorism, they're often shunned, or they have their experiences just completely and totally stepped on and invalidated. And so it would definitely take a listening ear from lighter skinned people, and definitely a lack or a hold back on the light skinned tears, and taking a chance to actually listen to the experiences of darker skinned people and people who are browner than you, who might have experienced colorism in some form. Just because you haven't, and just because you refuse to acknowledge the privilege that you have as a lighter skinned person, or a person who might even be of a darker hue, but you might, some features of yours might be a little bit ambiguous, and they don't look as continentally African as some other people's features. And that's a privilege too, I would say. It takes acknowledging that, whether it be skin tone, particularly as it pertains to darker skinned people, hair texture, broader features, it would take a listening ear, definitely. And that's the only way that these conversations can truly take place, and the act of colorism be diminished, as if we stop invalidating the experiences of darker skinned people. And granted, like I mentioned, there are lighter skinned people who have had certain experiences, but often the experiences are, they try and make the experiences, or even, people who are even of a slightly lighter brown skin tone like me, invalidate the experiences of people who are dark skinned, to be quite honest. That's not okay. And it definitely takes open communication and listening to these experiences. I mean, I come from a family with very light-skinned people in it, and I've heard stories from light-skinned, blue-eyed relatives saying that they were chased home because people, said, well, you think you're better than me because you're light-skinned, because you look white, or something like that. And I don't necessarily want to say those experiences are completely and totally invalid, but to say that they are just as important as the experiences of dark-skinned people, I would definitely say that. Can I be blunt? I would definitely say that's a crock of shit. And the reason that I say that is because lighter skinned people have always been seen as this hot commodity. And it's, whether it's you want to have babies by a light skinned person, you want your kids to be light skinned, nobody ever says, or hardly ever says, I want my children to be just as dark as I am, or I don't mind if I have dark skinned children. I'm going to teach them to love themselves and that they're valid. And I definitely would not say that the experiences are the same at all. And a lot of times, like I mentioned, there are a lot of borderline mayonnaise light-skinned tears that begin to flow when you say things like that. And like I mentioned, I'm not saying that, because you might be a lighter skinned person who's never tried, or who might not have been taught, hey, that dark skinned people are beneath you or something like that. I mean, you actually might have been taught that, there's beauty in all black people, and that whether you marry a dark skinned person or not, or if you do marry a dark skinned person, your children will still be beautiful, they'll still be valid. And you might have experienced, a level of colorism that you didn't necessarily ask for because you're light skinned. But I will say that the experiences are not the same. And I don't think that they'll ever be the same. And, I hear people in my family, say things, about their experiences as very light-skinned people. and saying things like, oh, I always wanted to be darker skinned, and it's almost like it depletes the colorist crap that they've said, or it deletes it, and it doesn't delete that. It does not negate it. It doesn't decline it or anything like that. You do not get to say colorist things about people and then turn around and think that you can heal it by saying, oh, well, I always wanted to be dark skinned. That's boo. To be quite honest, that's BS. And I want you to know that's BS if you're thinking that at home. So yeah, I'm not trying to negate, your experiences or say that they aren't in some form valid, but it definitely ain't the same. I'm sorry, Susie, Jim, Ethel, whoever you are sitting at home, Rebecca, whoever, it's not the same. It's definitely not the same. I've never, ever, ever seen a lighter skinned person treated the way that I've seen browner skinned people in my family get treated, or dark skinned, especially dark skinned people in the family get treated so poorly. Or even have to go through life trying to find a way to deal with the pain that they felt from colorism. Like my grandmother, for example, she often refers to herself as our big fat black grandmother, and I honestly think that was a way that she laughed, or found a way to laugh at the colorism that she's experienced, and also probably even the fat shaming that she's experienced as a more hefty woman, particularly a dark-skinned woman, and we all know the imagery that comes from that, and it almost goes back to the Jemima Mammy figure. Dark-skinned black woman, she is of a larger form, and I definitely would not say that. Even as a person who I guess sits in the middle as a medium tone person, I wouldn't even say that my experiences have been as bad as the experiences of darker skinned people in the family. Especially hearing the stories from people like my grandmother or great aunts, or people even like on a cultural or ethnic level, coming from darker skinned people who identify as Creole. Don't nobody talk about dark skinned Creole people because they're not seen as the hot commodity, or they're not seen as attractive or as beautiful as the pictures that you can even Google French Creole people on Google, and first thing you're gonna see is a bunch of light-skinned people who barely look black at all. So I definitely would not say that the experiences are the same. Light-skinned people are not nearly, you are not nearly as, invalidated as dark-skinned people are on a daily basis. So, like I said, Suze, Jim, whoever you are, it's not the same. I say all of that to say it is not the same. So,
All right.
Granted, there definitely should be more unity within our community, and there should definitely be less invalidation of the experiences of darker skinned people. If you are a lighter skinned person and you have maybe 1, 2, 3, several children, and they're of different skin tones, try to teach your lighter skinned children about their privilege, but also fill your darker skinned children with love and validation so that they can go out into the world loving themselves and not look back on it and say, well, I was treated less than human compared to my sister who was lighter than I was, or people would fawn over my mom or my dad or whoever because they were lighter skinned. If you are If you are a baby boomer, or you are from the traditionalist generation, and you are a lighter skinned person who grew up, you know, in a family where lighter skinned people or light skinned or loosely curled hair was praised, and you happen to have a grandchild or grandchildren or great grandchildren who are darker skinned, do not invalidate their experiences. Teach them to love themselves. You first love them and see the beauty in them. Because each and every last one of us, whether we're light skinned or dark skinned, like the first ancestor we ever had to be brought anywhere near the Americas or the Caribbean, they were dark skinned. And the fact that you, as a person, particularly a lighter skinned person, would think that there's no beauty in that. If it wasn't for dark skinned women especially, you wouldn't even be here. And to the men, to those who identify as men, definitely want to say this to you because you did not get off the hook. You thought you did, but you didn't. If you are a black man, particularly a dark-skinned black man, who possibly comes from a dark-skinned mother or women, and you see no beauty in dark-skinned people, whether they, you know, be male, you know, whether they be a woman, whether they be non-binary, whatever. And when I say man or woman, they can be a trans woman or a trans man, whatever, cis, trans, whatever. And you find no beauty in people who are dark-skinned like you. If you can, you probably need to seek therapy, because there's something extremely wrong with that. Now, if you can, or if you can like try and find some way to read up on or research the things that are just completely wrong with that, it makes absolutely no sense to be a dark-skinned person and see no beauty in other dark-skinned people. So that is something that you need to just decolonize your mind, possibly. So, yes. But once again, I would like to reiterate, in order for these things to change, there definitely needs to be more open conversations about colorism, particularly as it pertains to the experiences of dark-skinned people, because those experiences are often invalidated. And in my opinion, that is the only way that will change.